We have had 3 weeks off between the beginning of Passover, the end of Passover, and then last week I was sick. And like I said, you can still hear that I'm not 100% yet, but I didn't want to let any more time go between classes. And also, right now is a very important time, which I'm going to touch on in a couple of minutes. And so I thought it was very important for us to talk about it today. So the time between the first day of Passover and the holiday of Shavuot is called Sefirat HaOmer. Sefirat means counting, and HaOmer actually means a sheaf. It's a measurement of an amount of grain, like barley or wheat, okay? And this term refers to the first fruits grain offering. Maybe you've seen people posting on their Facebook statuses, numbers. I think on the 12th day I said, who knows 12? Because there's a song that we sing at the Passover Seder. We get, who knows one? I know one. One is Hashem. And then we do 2, 3, 4, all the way up to 13. So it's a song that, especially like my kids when they were teenagers, they really loved to sing it. And so anyway, you probably have seen, if you have Jewish friends on Facebook, especially Orthodox Jewish friends on Facebook, that they were counting the Omer, making mention what day it is. Now, it's very interesting that you're not actually supposed to reference what day it's about to be, only what day it was in the last counting. Why? Because whenever we do a mitzvah, we make a blessing before we do it. Except for lighting the candles, we always make the blessing before we do the action, and immediately before we do the action, if it's at all possible. So the problem is if I said, for example, tonight after sundown will be the 10th day of the counting of the Omer. Well, I've got a problem now, because in a way, I just counted it, only I didn't make the blessing, right? And so what we do is we always say, last night was day 9. We don't say tonight will be day 10. We say last night was day 9. So somebody says to you, like, what day of the Omer is it? I lost count. Last night was 9. All right. So that's kind of like how we reference it. Now, it says in Vayikra, Leviticus chapter 23, verses 15 through 16, you shall also count for yourselves from the day after the Sabbath, from the day when you brought in the sheaf of the wave offering, there shall be 7 complete Sabbaths. You shall count 50 days to the day after the 7th Sabbath. Then you shall present a new grain offering to the Lord. Now, this is where we are commanded to count the Omer, okay? Now, reading this passage, there are a few things which stand out, and at least one big question which gets raised because of the wording of the passage. All right, so first of all, we see that twice in the passage it says that we are to count. All right, and it's not just that there will be this time period between Passover and Shavuot, but we're actually commanded to count the days. So counting the Omer is a mitzvah, and so we say it with a blessing. But we'll get into that in a minute. All right, so we're supposed to count the days. It says from the day after the Sabbath, from the day when you brought the sheaf of the wave offering. Now, just from a cursory reading of this, you may not realize that there's a problem. But even back as long ago as the time of the Second Temple, so before the Gemara was written down, before the Talmud was written, there was a question. Because if we take the phrase, count from the day after the Sabbath, literally, we would assume that we start counting on the first Sunday or Saturday night, right, after Passover. That makes sense. That would be the literal day after the Sabbath, except that the passage doesn't say anything about Passover. All right? Now, this is very, very complicated, but I'm giving you all of this to explain a disagreement that existed back in the time of the Second Temple and actually exists even to this day between Karaites, who are descendants of Jews, but who don't hold to any of the oral Torah or any of the Tanakh other than the first 5 books of Moses and the book of Joshua. And then you also had, back in the day, when the Second Temple was standing, you had 2 different groups. I mean, you actually had many different groups, because you had the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the Zealots and the Essenes, and there were like a lot of different groups, and everybody was arguing with everybody else. No, you're not doing it right. You're not doing it right. But the 2 major schools of thought rested between the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Now, the Sadducees did not believe in a resurrection, and they had a lot of other beliefs that differed from standard traditional Judaism. The Pharisees are the predecessors, if you will, of rabbinic Judaism today. So you find that whenever there was something different between the way the Pharisees held and the way the Sadducees held, the school of thought, or the rulings that stayed, are those that were of the Pharisees, because the Sadducees had a lot of issues and the movement basically died out. And even the Karaite movement died out, and then it was kind of resurrected in modern times when Christians, there were many Christians who decided to reject Christianity, but didn't want to convert to Judaism, didn't want to accept the yoke of halacha, didn't want to accept the teachings of the rabbis, and so they said, hey, what we really are Karaites. And so it was reinvented. It's not something that has existed throughout Jewish history. The only school of thought, if you will, that has maintained an existence throughout, going all the way back to the Second Temple, is that of the Pharisees, which is what we have today as rabbinic Judaism, okay, the rabbis. So you have these 2 different schools of thought, and Karaites and some other offshoot groups, including a lot of Messianics, will count the Omer starting on the Sunday after Passover begins, because they want to take this literally. The problem is, and this is also a problem we see with Karaite religion, is the Karaites don't, for example, hold to the Talmud, the authority of the oral law, right? But because the Torah is not, it's written very, we say it's written tersely, there's a lot of details that are left out, like places where God says you're supposed to kill the animal as I told you, but it doesn't say anywhere how to do it. So then what happens is that in those places where the Torah is silent, the Karaites basically have to make up their own oral tradition, because they don't accept the oral tradition that was passed down through the Pharisees. And so we have the same problem here, that you know, if you want to take it literally, you would say, okay, so you're supposed to start counting the Omer from the day after the Sabbath, which would be Sunday or Saturday night, except if you're going to translate this passage literally like that, then you have a real problem, because it just says from the day after the Sabbath. So then you would say, well, which Sabbath? I mean, there's 52 of them every year, right? It could be any Sabbath. And Rashi actually explains that from the wording, which I'll get into in a minute. I'll actually tell you what Rashi said. From the wording, we know that it is referring to Passover. And the word Sabbath here does not mean the first Saturday during Passover. It means the day that you rested, basically the first day of Passover, okay? So let's start at the beginning. First of all, does Shabbat mean the 7th day of the week, right? The word Shabbat comes from the word for 7, Sheva, but it also means literally to rest. Okay, Shabbat means to rest. The seventh day was the day of rest, so that's why it came to mean the seventh day. When we look at Leviticus, Vayikra, chapter 23, verse 2, it says, "Speak to the sons of Israel and say to them, the Lord's appointed times which you shall proclaim as holy convocations, my appointed times are these." So the word for appointed times there is not Shabbat. The word is moadeh, or moadim would be plural without any modifier, without any other word being modified. And moadeh are usually translated as appointed times. And if you start with Vayikra chapter 23, verse 2, you see that the first moed, the first appointed time, is Shabbat. So it makes sense that if Hashem meant the day after the holiday of Passover, he would have used the word moed, right? Not Shabbat, except for one problem. Further down in the passage, when God commands us to keep Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, both of them are referred to as a Shabbat, right? In fact, Yom Kippur is referred to as a Sabbath of Sabbaths, Shabbat Shabbaton. And so basically, we're back to where we started, okay? But I wanted to explain this to you because knowing most of our participants' backgrounds, you've probably come across this discussion before. And even if you haven't, you might come across it in conversation with others. And I wanted to make sure that I touched on the issue because I don't think that it would be honest of me or right of me to just gloss over it as though there was no problem with the wording of the passage. There is a problem if you are taking it literally and if you have no oral tradition to rely on to explain what's going on here, okay? So, getting back to the passage, further down in the passage, when God commands us to keep Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, both are referred to as Shabbat. So basically, we're left with the same question. When it says we start counting from the day after the Sabbath, what on earth is that referring to? According to Rashi, the term used here, which is mi macharat ha-Shabbat, after the day after Shabbat, cannot refer to just any literal Shabbat, because there would be no point of reference, like I said before, which Shabbat. It could literally be any Shabbat, especially since no actual date is given. However, in the context of the passage, we're commanded to celebrate the Passover, and then we're told on the day after the Shabbat of Passover, that is the first day Yom Tov, that's the day that we start counting because that's the day that the offering of the first fruits was presented, okay? Because it mentions the waving of the sheaf. And so between the wording, the fact that there's no reference to a specific Shabbat, the fact that it comes immediately after talking about Passover, and that it refers to the day that the sheaf of the first fruits offering was brought, which was the day after the Yom Tov of Passover, or the night of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So now we have more information from which to understand what day this is actually talking about. Now, to be honest with you, from the literal reading, you could definitely think that the counting begins from the first day, from the first Sunday in Passover. And if not for Rashi's explanation of why this is not the case, we would be hard-pressed, actually, to make the case for the way that we currently do it. However, when I come across things like this, I remind myself of two things. First, there are many things in the written Torah that are written in a way which is not clear. And there are many things, like I said earlier, that are blatantly missing. The Torah itself is written in such a way that we know that there had to be an orally transmitted law that accompanied it, even though, someone could claim Yes, but we don't know if that's the oral law that we have today, if that's what God told Moses orally on Mount Sinai. However, my argument always when that is brought up is simply there's no other document claiming to be that oral Torah. So we have what we have. It's obviously what God wanted us to have at this point for this generation. And, God will sort out the rest, so to speak. We know, based on the way that the Torah is written, that there had to be an orally transmitted law that accompanied it, and that whatever that written law, and that wherever the written Torah is missing information, the oral Torah fills in the blanks. The second point I'm about to make is far more important, and that is this. When all is said and done, everything comes down to the passage in Micah, in Hebrew we say Micha, 6:8. What does it say? I'm sure you're familiar with it. It says that God has told us what is good, and this is what he requires of us: to act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with our God. At the end of the day, it all boils down to that. To act justly. Now, we can ask, what does that mean? What does it mean to act justly? To love mercy, and those of you who have been around me in any casual kind of conversation, you know that I'm always talking about compassion being a main piece of Judaism. Many, many, many of the laws, especially the ones listed in the Parsha Mishpatim, are concerned with compassion, right? We even have a law that tells us that when you take eggs from a chicken, you have to shoo the chicken away first so as not to distress her because you're taking away her eggs. Okay, you want to talk about compassion. Judaism is about compassion. Okay, fine. So the verse in Micah 6:8 says to act justly, to love mercy, and the last one, to walk humbly with our God. The last one, to walk humbly, is perhaps the biggest challenge that we have in life. I don't know about you, but it's a huge challenge for me. And humility requires that I recognize that there are limitations to my knowledge, right? And in so doing, I look to the great Rebbeim of ancient times who spent every waking moment learning the Torah, studying and trying to understand exactly what God wants from us. Were they perfect in their conclusions? Well, knowing that they were human would lead me to say no. But until I can proclaim that I'm more learned than they, humility requires me to acknowledge that I am not as learned as these people, and that knowing more than I do, I must heed their teachings. Okay, then God holds them responsible for anywhere that they misled me, us, all of us, in our observance. That's their responsibility, and that's between them and God. And on Judgment Day, they have to give account for that. What do I have to give account for? Did I act justly? Did I love mercy? And did I walk humbly with my God? And that humility, like I said, means having to admit that I don't know as much as they did. And so my obligation is to obey the laws that have been handed down to the Jewish people from those that came before, who were much more learned than we are. Okay, so now going back to the counting of the Omer then. So according to traditional Judaism, we begin counting 49 days from the day after the Yom Tov of Passover, after the holiday, that first day, that Feast of Unleavened Bread, until day 49. Okay, the commandment is to count 49 days, 7 complete weeks. All right, the 50th day is the holiday of Shavuot, literally translated weeks. Now, the Torah is clear that counting is part of the commandment. So every evening we count out loud which day of the Omer it is. By the way, an interesting aspect of the fact that we're counting the days between Passover and Shavuot means that Shavuot is intimately connected to Passover. And in fact, it is considered the end of the holiday. Now, I don't know if you remember, but when we celebrated Sukkot, the Torah tells us that Sukkot is 7 days, right? And then there's an 8th day called Shmini Atzeret, an 8th day assembly, an 8th day holiday. On the one hand, it ends the week-long celebration of Sukkot, but it's clear from the wording that it's a completely separate holiday. It's not part of Sukkot because it's the 8th day and Sukkot is only 7 days. While the word Atzeret is usually translated as assembly, it actually comes from the word Atzur. Atzur means to stop or to tarry. And one interpretation is that it can be understood to mean like to retain. All right. Shmini Atzeret is likened to an adult child who's traveled far to spend time with his parents. At the end of the week that he's visiting with them, he says he really doesn't want to leave, and he decides to tarry or to stay one more day. Shmini Atzeret is supposed to be a time to reflect on the previous week spent communing with Hashem. It's the culmination, if you will, of a week-long honeymoon. Okay, so now Passover, or the Feast of Unleavened Bread, is also only 7 days, but there's no 8th day holiday at the end. Yes, the 7th day is a Sabbath, it's a holiday, but it's only 7. So Shavuot is considered to be the 8th day holiday in a way. It's just that it has a separation of 49 days between them. All right, so if Passover represents the birth of the nation, or our betrothal or engagement to God, if you will, Shavuot then is the wedding day, right? That's the day that we received the Torah, 7 weeks after we came out of Egypt. And the 49 intermediary days are kind of like the days of engagement where a bride and groom prepare themselves to enter into the covenant of marriage. All right, the Torah itself is like our ketubah. It is our wedding document. And so because of that, because it's kind of like this time of preparation, so the time of counting the Omer is supposed to be a time of working on ourselves and preparing ourselves to receive the Torah. Now, I specifically waited to count tonight because for me, it's already after sundown. It's already actually 11 o'clock at night. So I waited to count so that I could count with you guys. All right. And so what I'm going to do is we start with a blessing, which I'll go to in a minute. Then we say how many days it is. And then there's a little phrase afterwards. And some people say a whole nother long prayer, but this little short one is what is actually required. Okay. So I'm going to say the blessing. Then I'm going to say the count. And then I'm going to say the little part afterwards. And when I'm done saying everything, you say Amen. When a person says Amen to another person's blessing, they get a little bit of credit as if they had also made the blessing. Okay? So, the blessing is Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam Asher Kiddushanu B'mitzvotav V'tzivanu Al Sefirat HaOmer Hayom Esrim Yom Shehem Shnei Shavuot V'shisha Yamim LaOmer. Today is 20 days, which is 2 weeks and 6 days of the Omer. Harachamanhu Yachazir Lanu Avodat Beit Hamikdash Limkoma Bimhera Biyamenu Amen Selah. May the merciful one restore unto us the service of the Beit Hamikdash to its place speedily in our days. Amen Selah. Now, we count both days and weeks since the commandment is worded that we're to count both, right? It says 49 days, 7 complete weeks. So we're told to count both. So when we count it both ways. Now, something you should know. Since we're commanded to count every day, if we forget to count, we can no longer make the blessing on counting, but we should still continue to count. So in other words, if I forgot yesterday, I wouldn't make the blessing. I would simply stop and say, Hayom Esrim Yom Shahem Shnei Shavuot Veshisha Yamim LaOmer. Okay, I wouldn't say the blessing before. You could say the little phrase afterwards. That's not a problem. But there is an exception, and that is if you forgot to do it at night, but while it's still that day. So like, let's say tonight I forgot to do it, but then tomorrow morning I realized, oh no, I forgot to count the Omer last night. I count it without the blessing, but because I didn't miss a day of counting, then that night I would continue the nighttime counting with the blessing. Okay? Now, if you took my class on the Psalms, you would know that the word Selah is a command to pause and think about what has been said. So at this time, what I want to do with you guys is take a few seconds to just reflect on how different the world will be, because we just asked God, we said, may the merciful one restore to us the service of the Beit HaMikdash to its place speedily in our days. Okay, we're asking God to rebuild the temple. How different will the world be when Messiah comes and the temple's restored and the world is made right? Think about that. You know, tonight in Israel is Yom HaZikaron, which is Memorial Day. And there's just under 24,000 Israeli citizens who died since the founding of the state, or as part of the founding of the state, but since then, either as soldiers who were fighting to protect us or as victims of terror. Now, I'm not 100% sure exactly how they come up with that number. I'm not sure who it includes and who it doesn't include, but it's 23,355 or something along those lines, right? That's a lot of people, 23,000 people. So in these scary and uncertain times where people are dying, even, you know, in the past couple of weeks, people have been killed in Israel because of terrorism. So it's good now when we say the blessing for counting the Omer and we say Selah, to just stop, maybe even close our eyes for a minute and just think about how incredible it will be when the Messiah comes and the temple is rebuilt and everything in the world is set right and we have perfect clarity. You know, we live in a very concealed world. The world that we live in today is very fuzzy. You know, even like an example of what I just taught you about the passage about counting the Omer. And we won't know what is actually correct until a Messiah comes and tells us. And everything, the word that we use to refer to the redemption, the time of redemption when Messiah comes, is Geula. Now, Geula is interesting because it differs, it means redemption, and it differs in its meaning from the word Yeshua, which is a salvation. The word Yeshua, in any form of it, every time it occurs in the Tanakh, it only ever refers to a physical salvation or escaping from oppression, or, you know, it's physical. Yeshua is always physical, always. There is not a single instance of the use of the word Yeshua to mean a spiritual change in situation. The word Geula, however, a Goel is the redeemer, and Geula is what is the redemption. Geula, unlike Yeshua, means the turning of everything to the way it's supposed to be, and it encompasses both the physical and the spiritual. Okay, so I like to think every night after I say the phrase after the counting of the Omer, which is asking God to rebuild the temple, because of course we can't bring the offering of the Omer because we don't have a temple. And in fact, in the Torah portion for this week, it specifically says, which I'll get to in a few minutes, specifically says that if somebody brings an offering and it's not an offering to God because it's not brought to the Beit HaMikdash or to the tent of meeting, which was what they had back then that person gets the punishment of karet, which is being spiritually cut off from the people. Some say that what that means is that they don't get resurrected, or that their soul is actually destroyed. I don't know, but whatever it is, it doesn't sound like anything that I want to experience. So anyway, when I say that Salah, I like to stop and just think for a couple of minutes about how incredible the world will be when everything is made right and everything is made clear. And we won't have any arguments anymore because we'll know exactly what is the right way to serve God without any question. And the world won't be such a scary place anymore either. I mean, sometimes I just feel like I've got to get off of Facebook and stop reading the news because the world is kind of a scary place, you know? So anyway, that's my thought on that. Now, the time of the counting of the Omer, you would think, since it spans Passover to Shavuot, one holiday connecting the other holiday to the first holiday, you would think that intermediary time of 49 days would be a semi-holiday, kind of like Chol HaMoed or like Rosh Chodesh, or, you know, it would be considered like a holiday. But it's actually quite the opposite. It's considered a period of semi-mourning. During this time, halacha forbids us from cutting our hair, listening to instrumental music, although some hold that it's only live music. So it depends on how your rabbi holds. There are no weddings. There are no parties. There are no dinners with dancing. Okay? None of that. All public displays of festivity are put on hold during the period of the counting of the Omer. Now, in a minute, I'll explain that it's not necessarily the whole time, but the question might be asked, why, right? It's because it is taught that during this time, around the 1st century, so shortly after the destruction of the Second Temple, a plague killed 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva was a great rabbi at that time, and it's really interesting because he didn't even start learning Judaism. He was a Baal Tshuva. He didn't become religious until he was like 40 years old. And but then during the next 40 years, he became this incredibly great rabbi who traveled the world, and he had tens of thousands of students. And apparently during the time of the counting of the Omer, Rabbi Akiva lost 24,000 of his students. They died to a plague of some sort. Okay. Now, the reason for this plague, it is explained, is that even though these men were amazing, great Torah scholars, they lacked a very important piece of what it means to be a Jew. Remember, I said that one of the main principles of being a Jew is compassion, right? Well, apparently, the story goes, is that these 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva were killed because they did not treat each other with respect. And of what value is Torah if it doesn't imbue us with a respect for others, right? So these 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva died. And during this time, we're supposed to use this time of semi-mourning to be very keenly aware of the fact that how we treat our fellow Jews is extremely important. In fact, how we treat all people is extremely important. Now, according to the tradition, the plagues stopped on Lag BaOmer. Lag is Lamed Gimel. It's the 33rd day of the counting of the Omer. It's just called Lag because we do that with Judaism. Since the letters are numbers, you can make words from numbers and numbers from words, and that's what Gematria is. But anyway, the 33rd day of the counting of the Omer is called Lag BaOmer. And because apparently the plague stopped on that day, most Jews stop observing this semi-mourning restriction period on this day. Now, as in most things in Judaism, there are other reasons given as well. An alternative explanation is that the 24,000 who died didn't die of a plague, but actually were murdered by the Romans during the Bar Kokhba revolt, which happened about 30 years later, 132, 136 CE. Okay, so because of this alternate explanation, it is also a time that is used to remember those who were murdered during the Crusades and the pogroms and blood libels and the Holocaust. So that explains why Holocaust Memorial Day, which was a week ago, falls during the counting of the Omer. Okay? Now, just a side note, you should also know, as in many things Jewish, there are differing customs here. Okay? Some Sephardi Jews continue till the 34th day of the Omer. Some don't begin until Rosh Chodesh Iyar, which is the 15th day of the Omer. And although I haven't confirmed it, my understanding is that there are some who actually only observe from Lag BaOmer to the end, till Shavuot. Okay? And there are also those who, while they celebrate Lag BaOmer, they observe the period of mourning for the entire 49 days of the counting of the Omer, or not 49 because they wouldn't start until after the holiday of Passover is over, but then they would start from that point, okay? So, also, it is said that Lag BaOmer, the 33rd day of the Omer, is the anniversary of the death of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is said to have revealed the deepest, darkest secrets of the Torah in a work called the Zohar. And the Zohar is the foundational work on which much of the Kabbalah is based. Now, according to the Zohar, Rabbi Shimon's house was filled with fire and light the entire day as he taught his students. And it said that the fire subsided and Rabbi Shimon died. And so each year after his death, on the anniversary, what we call the Yahrzeit, the anniversary of his death, they would remember him by kindling bonfires and studying the Zohar by the light of the flames. So you can see how this carries down to the tradition in Judaism that Lag BaOmer is celebrated with bonfires and singing and Torah study. Now, when my parents came to visit Israel for the first time, which was about 12 years ago, their flight home was actually on Lag BaOmer. And my mom told me that as they were entering the airspace over Israel, as they were leaving, they could actually see out the windows the entire country just enveloped in this ginormous smoke cloud. It was just like this huge cloud of smoke covering the entire country because of all of the bonfires. Now, as you can imagine, the entire country being filled with smoke is problematic for those of us who have breathing problems. And in fact, people in Israel who have breathing problems have to close their windows on the evening of Lag BaOmer and hopefully they have air conditioning. You don't. But because otherwise everything in your house will smell like a campfire. And, some people that's a pleasant smell. Other people it's not such a pleasant smell. And for those of us with breathing problems, we can actually have asthma attacks and other things because of it. All right, now, as you can imagine, because this time is connected with the author of the Zohar, and because it's considered a preparation period for receiving the Torah, and because anytime we can put a mystical spin on things, we do, the Hasidic community associates each of the 7 weeks with the 7 lower Sefirot, and then each of the 7 days with of the week as well. For those of you who don't know, the Sefirot are the 10 attributes or emanations through which, according to the Kabbalah, God reveals himself, and also through which he continuously creates both the physical realm and the higher realms. Now you can see there are actually 10, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, it's actually 11. I think Keter is not counted as one of the 10 Sefirot, but anyway, you see this chart, which sometimes is superimposed on a person's body. There are certain points that are considered to coordinate with each of these 10 Sefirot. Now, I'm not going to get into what each Sefirah means, because that would be a whole course of its own. And I'm actually not that well versed in this topic, because I am a firm believer that before one enters into the study of the mystical aspects, one should first be very strongly grounded in the Torah and in the Tanakh. And unfortunately, there are a lot of people who have actually chosen to study Kabbalah over the study of Torah. Now, traditionally, you weren't supposed to study Kabbalah until you were at least 40 years old. Why? Because first of all, by the time you're 40, you have hopefully matured in your ability to reason, and you have also hopefully attained enough of a foundation of the Torah and the Mishnah and the Gemara to then be able to put these mystical ideas into the framework of Torah. The problem is when you learn only the mystical stuff and you divorce it from the Torah, what you're left with is a cult, basically. It's magic. It's not based on the Torah, and it's not a good thing. It's a very dangerous thing. All right. So I'm not going to go into all of the details, but I am going to explain, because you may actually see some of these things. And also the attributes assigned to the counting of the Omer can be an amazing kickoff for examining those aspects of our own personal life. Okay, so each week and each day during the counting of the Omer are assigned an attribute, but only the 7 lower Sfirot are actually associated with the counting of the Omer. So we have Chesed, which is right here, okay, and Gevurah, right? Chesed is loving kindness. Gevurah is might or strictness. Okay, then you have, I think you can see my arrow, right? Then you have Tiferet. Now, Tiferet is very interesting because you have on the right side the attributes which are associated with love and with giving and like outpouring and abundance. And then on the left side, you have the attributes which are associated with strictness and restriction. And then down the middle is balance between the two. And that's why it's wisdom, it's beauty, it's compassion, it's truth, okay? When you take all of these things, in order to have what's in the middle, you have to have both sides, right? It's not one-sided. But so the 7 that are used for the 7 weeks and the 7 days in the weeks are Chesed, Gevura, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, and Malchut. Okay, so those are the 7 attributes, which are the lower attributes, whereas the ones above that middle line are considered divine, and the lower ones are part of this world. And then what happens is, if you have 7 of these for each of the weeks and 1 for each day of the week, then you end up with a combination, of course, of 49. So symbolically, each of these 49 permutations represents one day and also represents an aspect of each person's character that can be improved or further developed. Now, if you're really interested in this concept, you can find all sorts of stuff online, especially at Chabad.org, but I think also H.com had some commentary on the Sfirot for counting during Sfirah, counting of the Omer. So you may notice that the word Sefirat, counting, and Sfirot, which are the attributes, the emanations, they come from the same word, which also is the word for story, sipur. So to count and to tell a story, numbers, all of those come from that root word of sipur, or sapir. All right, so just briefly, and then I'm going to get off this topic. So now for me, it is now day 20. Okay, if you're in New York, if you're in the United States, it's not yet. It will probably be in another 3 hours, 2 hours, maybe. But for me, it is day 20, right? I counted day 20. And as I said in the blessing, that's 2 weeks and 6 days. Now, it's 2 weeks, but we're in the 3rd week, okay? So the quality for today is called Yesod Shebetiferet. Remember I said 1 was Chesed, 2 is Gevura, 3 is Tiferet. So Tiferet is the quality for this week. And today is the 6th day, which is Yesod. So the quality for today is Yesod within Tiferet. We're in the 3rd week, the 6th day. So Tiferet, which literally means beauty, actually, like I said earlier, is balance. It's the middle of the middle. It's where love and utter giving balances might and discipline. It's also sometimes called compassion, which is interesting because, what did I say? Judaism is about compassion, right? But Tiferet is related to the idea of truth. So for compassion to be fully realized, it has to be grounded. And that's where this idea of Yesod comes in. Yesod is a foundation. It's grounding or bonding. So this compassion requires creating a channel or a connection between the giver and the receiver. So in one reading that I read, the challenge for today is this idea of connection. It's striving to truly understand where another person is coming from and to give in that place of truth. All right? When we connect with others, the changes that occur within us are profound, not merely external. So an exercise for today might be to try and use compassion to build something lasting or permanent with another person. All right. And so I don't know if that speaks to you in any meaningful way, but I hope that you can kind of take it and try to think about something that you can do which will connect you to another person in more than just a superficial way, to do something that gives you that connection that's very meaningful. All right. Now, I'm going to talk for a minute about the Parsha, sort of. I'm not really going to talk about the Parsha. What I'm going to talk about is Parshas. See, this week is a double Parsha. It's called Acharei and Kedoshim. Why? Because there are two parshas that are squeezed together, okay? Some years, Acharei and Kedoshim are read separately, and some years they're read together like they are this year. Last week, we also had a double parsha, Tazria and Metzora. All right, so we had two double parshas back to back. So you might ask the question, why do we read a double parsha? Why are the parshas doubled? Well, the Chumash, or the Torah, is divided into 54 sections or readings, okay? But any Shabbat on which a holiday falls, as well as a Shabbat which occurs during Chol HaMoed of Passover or Sukkot, as we had during this Passover, that has its own special reading. So, meaning that there are actually, if you take 52 weeks, which, if you take the 54 and then you add in the special readings, there's more like 57 or 58 actual Shabbat readings. But you know that there's only 52 Shabbats. Now, in years where there's a leap year, there's more. It's more like 54. But on years when there isn't a leap year, there's only 50. So everything depends on what the calendar looks like in any given year. And then there's a bunch of rules about how they're combined. Okay, but on years when there are 54, less than 54 non-holiday weeks, some of the parshas are combined. And there are 6 specific parshas which may be combined with the parsha that follows it on short years. So everybody knows which parshas are going to be combined because there's a whole rule about how it's done. I don't know the rules, but those who know things know the rules, okay? All right, so now you may remember that in Israel, the holidays, except for Rosh Hashanah, are celebrated for only one day, whereas outside of Israel, all holidays, except for Yom Kippur, are celebrated for 2 days. What this means is that some years, there are some weeks where the Torah reading in Israel and the Torah reading outside of Israel may not be the same, okay? For example, if the 8th day of a holiday occurs, or if it's a 2-day holiday, if it occurs on Shabbat outside of Israel, right, that Shabbat, for us, the holiday is already over, so we're reading a regular Torah reading, but in countries outside of Israel, they're reading a special reading for that holiday, and so we end up being off for a few weeks. And eventually, we catch up and everything is aligned. And for right now, we are aligned. So what you're reading in America or England or South Africa or wherever you are, and what we're reading here in Israel right now are the same, okay? So this week's Parsha is Acharei Kedoshim, all right? And you should also know that when 2 Parshas are combined, remember there's a reading from the prophets that goes along with every Parsha, and that's called the Haftorah. When 2 are combined, they don't read the Haftorah from both. They read the Haftorah from the second one. And so it's very interesting because last week's Parshas, Tazria, Metzora, which are combined most years, basically the Haftorah for Tazria is almost never read. I'm pretty sure that it's never read, but it's almost never read because the years that Tazria and Metzora are not combined, Tazria, I believe, is either Rosh Chodesh or it occurs during Passover, and so it has a different reading. So it's a very interesting story, the Haftorah for Tazria, but it's never read. And so in the other cases, usually the Haftorah for the first one is read on years when they're not combined. Tazria, I think, is the only one that's never read. But when they're combined, the Haftorah that is read for that week is the Haftorah for the second one. Okay? I have more information. I was going to talk about the names of the books of the Torah. But I think I'm going to save that for next week because we are already out of time. And I also want to give you guys an opportunity if you have any questions or want to share anything I said made a lot of sense to you or was like really significant to you. You can feel free to go ahead and unmute yourself, and I'm more than happy to have a discussion.
I had a quick question,
Yeah.
Penina,
Yeah.
about what is taken into consideration to make the holidays 2-day Yom Tovs outside of Israel, and how do you explain that to someone that's new, that's trying to understand? Because if they're taking like Torah literally, then
Yeah.
it's just says one day, then why are we adding that second day?
Right. So I actually have answered this question before in one of the other classes, but basically it goes back to the time when when you had to have a witness the new moon in order to know when the next Rosh Chodesh would be. Okay, and so many times, especially for example Rosh Hashanah was celebrated for 2 days. It's still celebrated for 2 days because of this. Now, in modern times, we have a fixed calendar. We know exactly when the holiday is going to be. However, because people outside the land of Israel, right, they would have celebrated the holiday for 2 days because it would have taken them longer to find out when the exact day of the new month was, and therefore to know when they were supposed to celebrate the holiday. And so they celebrated 2 days in order to make sure that they covered the correct day in that process. Now, people outside of the land of Israel continue to observe a 2-day holiday as it's a tikkun or a fix for the fact that they could be in Israel and they're not in Israel. You know, it's said that anything you do, any mitzvah you do outside of the land of Israel is only practice anyway, because, you know, so many of the mitzvahs, for example, counting the Omer, right? It said in the passage, I don't know if I read it though, when you come into the land and you give this offering, you will count these days. So it's a question, do people outside of Israel even have to count the Omer, right? Can you? Is it a mitzvah? You know, it's a big question. And so the keeping of a second day is because of the fact that you're not in the Holy Land. And so it harkens back to the time when stuff outside of Israel had to be celebrated for 2 days because it took that long for information to get to people outside of Israel. But it also is as an added holiness because you don't have the holiness of being in the land of Israel while you're celebrating that holiday. I hope that.
So it could be also interpreted like when you're doing challah.
What do you mean?
It's and correct me if I'm wrong. It was said that you would do challah when you came into the land of Israel. And so if I don't live in Israel, it would seem that I'm not obligated to make challah because I'm not in Israel. But rabbinically, we are required to do
anyway.
challah,
Right.
even if we're outside of Israel. Okay, right. So it's basically more or less the same.
It's similar, yeah.
It's like more or less the same concept.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, because I didn't want to make the comparison without being completely sure, because it's like when I tried to explain the meat versus poultry when you're keeping kosher. It's more or less like, okay, I can't tell someone that the Torah says you can't mix poultry with dairy because it's coming from some animal that gives milk.
Right. It's rabbinic.
It's rabbinic.
Right. However, the distinction between rabbinic and Torah given obligations
Mm-hmm.
and with punishment. In other words, if you break a Torah commandment, there is a punishment that is much more severe than if you break a rabbinic command. Now, how does that play out in the life of an Orthodox Jew? It doesn't change anything. A rabbinic command is given the same weight as far as our obligation to do it. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
We understand that if you break it, it doesn't have the same consequences. But we can't go around saying, so that's rabbinic, so I don't really have to do that. No, as part of the Jewish
Exactly. Yeah, I completely understand.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I hope that kind of clarified that for you. And then I just want to mention once again to everybody who may be watching either live or on the recording, I met 2 weeks ago, I think it was 2 weeks ago, with Rabbi Riskin. He is the chief rabbi of the city of Efrat here in Israel. He used to be the rabbi of Lincoln Square Synagogue in New York, and he has agreed to work with me. I'm going to be running a conversion school where people can enroll in the classes. It will be a 1-year program. And then at the end of the year, they will come to Israel and they will meet with Rabbi Riskin. They will have their Beit Din and their mikvah, and they will be converted through Rabbi Riskin. So if you know anybody who is interested in such a program, now a lot of communities have rabbis who will do conversion, and it's not a problem. But there are many communities where there's a community and there's a community rabbi, but he doesn't do conversions. And so that's part of the reason for setting up this program. It's going to be online. There's going to be probably, I'm going to make the videos in half-hour segments instead of 1-hour segments, so there'll be 100. But basically, it's designed for 1 hour of recorded classes per week. And then there's one live group class per month. And that's a great place to ask questions, talk about what's going on, practice reading Hebrew, anything like that. And then there'll be one live private class per month as well. And that's the program. There's a few other pieces like a reading list and some other stuff. But if you know anybody who would like to convert to Judaism, please put them in touch with me. The program is designed, basically Rav Riskin is very dismayed at how difficult it is for people to convert to Judaism who are genuine and sincere. In some countries and in some places, it can take many years. I know in South Africa, they don't just pay for the program, they pay per month. And so sometimes conversion programs in South Africa can drag out for 3 or 4 years, and it ends up costing a lot of money. And the poor person who wants to convert is like, okay, so when is this going to end? So the program that we're putting together is designed to give you, exactly how much it's going to cost, exactly how long it's going to take. The only thing that changes the amount of time it takes is if you don't feel ready, and then it can take longer, but the program doesn't cost anymore. So anyway, so if you know anybody who wants to convert through Rabbi Riskin and would like to attend my school, please put them in touch with me, and I am happy to talk to them about what is needed. Okay?
And it'll be something that will have, like, you will have to travel. We will have to travel to Israel for
the end piece. You don't have to travel at all during the course of the year. So like,
okay.
let's say you study with me for a year and you finish the program and you don't have the money for your flight. Everything else is included in the tuition, but not the flight. Okay. So let's say you don't have the money for the flight and you say, Panina, it's going to take us another 6 months to get together the money for the flight. No problem. You tell me when you're ready. I just check with Rabbi Riskin that he's in town before you book your flights. You come to Israel. I set up a meeting with Rav Riskin so he can meet you first. We spend 1 week of one-on-one or one-on-two if it's a couple, studying together here in Israel. And then sometime during that week, we made the appointment is made to go before the Beit Din and to have your mikvah. And I will accompany the women and my husband will accompany the men.
And then this is, when will this be starting?
So I am actually working on the website right now. I hope to have the website put together this week, and classes should begin the beginning of June.
And it will be a program where, because I know that sometimes in Israel there's like issues with who does conversion, what goes through the whole.
All right, so
or whatever it is that they do.
Here's the
and
deal.
I just want to make sure that I offer it to people, then that it's like a good to go thing that won't be like questioned or anything.
Right. Okay. So here's the thing. According to the courts and according to the law in Israel, the chief rabbi of a city is completely qualified to do conversions. However, the Rabbanut, which is the legal rabbinic system, in Israel, they don't like Rabbi Riskin. So if somebody is not sure if they plan on making Aliyah, if they know for sure that they would want to make Aliyah, my recommendation would be that they can either go through my class, convert with Rav Riskin. Once they move into the a Jewish community, be active in the community for a year, and then just have a Beit Din in the community with somebody who is approved by the Rabbanut in Israel. So I still save them a lot of difficulty because they know exactly what program, and I will give them a letter that states exactly what their course of study was. If somebody is single and they know they're going to want to make Aliyah after conversion, I recommend that they come and join one of the two programs here in Israel. I'm not sure how many are for men. There's 2 for women that goes through the Rabbanut directly. Okay? But it's a 1-year program, but you have to live in Israel for that whole year, which is a problem for most people because most people don't have a year's income saved up to be able to do that. So like, for example, the program here at the school that I'm currently working at, that I'm leaving at the end of the month, the program is $1,000 a month, and it's a 12-month program. So you're talking about $12,000. Now you get to come here and you get to study full time, and it's really wonderful, and it's totally approved by the Rabbanut. And I think that's great for single people who are young enough that maybe their parents can help them with it, or if they are young adults who are able to save and can take a year off, that's fine. Most adults can't do that. And so this program cuts the costs dramatically. It's something that can be studied in your own time. And my recommendation is, for example, if they know that there's a point in time that they may want to convert, or they may want to make Aliyah, then they can convert through this program, be part of a Jewish community for a year, and then put forth their application to the Rabbanut, and hopefully the letters of the community will be enough for them to be accepted. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So for some people, Israel is a possibility, but it's not like on their plan. So this makes sense for them because they're going to convert, and then it will be accepted. All modern Orthodox communities will accept Rabbi Riskin's conversions, no question. Some more Haredi Orthodox communities might not, because he's more modern. But if that's their concern, then they should talk to me privately, and I'll tell them whether or not this program is good for them. Again, also, they can study with me for the year, and then I will provide a letter so that they can then go to a Beit Din of their own choosing for the actual conversion. So that's also a possibility. Okay?
Okay. And what attracts me about your program is that it is an Orthodox conversion.
Yes, it is an Orthodox conversion.
And it's the same for Baal Shuvas, right?
I'm sorry, say that again?
It's the same for Baal Shuvas?
A Baal Shuva is a Jewish person who's coming back. They don't have to convert. But
they still have to go through mikveh.
It depends on a lot of factors. For example, somebody who is halachically Jewish, who can prove that they're Jewish, that their mother was Jewish and they were raised with a Jewish identity, because that's a little thing that a lot of people don't know. Just because your mom told you on her deathbed that she was Jewish doesn't mean you're automatically accepted as halakhically Jewish, because if you were not raised with a Jewish identity, then you still have to usually go through conversion. But somebody who's coming out of Christianity, even if they were halakhically Jewish, it depends on who the rabbi is that's working with them. Some of them require mikvah, some of them do not.
Okay. So it would be on a one-on-one basis that you would, basically just give us some type of orientation.
Yes.
And it has to do with that. Okay.
Yep. Basically what'll happen is I'm going to set up on the website an application form, and they'll fill out the application form, and then I'll set up a Skype meeting with that individual, and we'll determine whether or not the program is for them. Then there's a deposit and a small monthly payment. So that way it's so totally affordable. I mean, only really people who can't put food on their table can't afford this. So, because...
And do you have a ballpark number?
Yeah. So for an individual, it's $2,000 for the whole thing. So it's $500 deposit and then $125 a month. So like I said, most people in the United States, I mean, there are some people who can't afford it, but most people could afford it. For a couple, it's $3,000. So it's only 50% more. But if there's financial issues, we can talk about, what is able to be afforded and what's not. So, and that's basically just covering all of the work that goes into the entire year of study. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, wonderful. You're very welcome. And by the way, the website is teshuvah.com. TESHUVAH. Right now, there's not a whole lot there, but that's the website that will be being used for the program. Okay.
Exciting.
Yeah, very excited because, obviously teaching is my favorite thing in the world to do. And I worked with a woman a couple of months ago. She came and she studied with me for 1 month. And we did this super condensed study. And Rav Riskin did the conversion, and he said he was very impressed with what she knew and how devoted she was. And so that's why he was willing to work with me on the program. So.
Mazal tov.
Yeah, thank you. It was very exciting. That's when I realized, as we were standing there waiting for her at the mikvah, I realized that, it was just my greatest joy. I love doing that. And I believe very strongly that, conversion should not be easy, because then, somebody might not know what they're getting themselves into, but it should never be undignified. There are so many people who, in the process of trying to convert, are completely humiliated and, treated with, I'm trying to think of, without dignity. And that's not okay. If a person knows what they're getting themselves into and they're sincere and they're devoted, then they should just need to study and they should be able to convert. So that's what we're trying to do here.
And when you want to do the Spanish version, you just let me know.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. Yeah, that sounds good. For now, they have to speak English, but
Yes.
I mean, it doesn't have to be, I mean, there are people, of course, in, other countries. Like the woman that I worked with is actually from Brazil. There are people from other countries, as long as they speak English, then we can work together. But they have to be able to communicate. All right, wonderful. Thank you, both of you. Have a good night, and I look forward to seeing you guys next week and during the week in the group. Okay?
Okay, thank you so much.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Okay,
Good
Lala.
night. Good night.